Hey everybody, thanks for checking out another episode of Chris Fitzpatrick Speaks. I appreciate you spending some time with me today as we discuss 4 things empathy is and 4 things empathy isn't. Empathy has become a very powerful word in business, in relationships, in life. It's been around a long time, but I feel like over the last several years, the concept of empathy has gained a lot of steam alongside terms like emotional intelligence, which we will talk about. So I wanted to take a deeper dive into empathy, try to uncover some of the misconceptions about empathy, and really focus on what empathy means, what it is, and what it isn't. So let's jump right into the first 4 things. What is empathy? I've got 4 answers for you. Number 1, empathy is part of listening, which is a key communication skill. If you followed along Chris Fitzpatrick Speaks before, you've probably heard me mention that there are 4 major types of communication: verbal, nonverbal, written, and listening. Well, rooted in effective listening is empathy. And as a matter of fact, to be an active listener, one has to be able to not just hear, but listen to understand. The simple desire to want to understand another person who's communicating with you is a part of empathy. It requires empathy to shut your own thoughts out for a moment and focus entirely on what somebody else is saying, not just to hear them, not just to understand them, but to appreciate and respect how they feel, why they're saying what they're saying, so that way you can make the necessary decisions or adjustments or reactions. So to be an effective listener, it really does take empathy. Empathy is a critical skill in effective listening. Number 2, empathy is the ability to identify and understand how others are feeling. When you're empathizing with somebody, you may find yourself taking mental notes about how they're feeling or how you're perceiving them to be feeling at a given time. It's also important to note that to empathize with somebody else is not always about recognizing or understanding negative emotions or less desirable emotions like sadness or anger. We can empathize with somebody's happiness. We can make a mental note saying, they seem like they're in a really good place today, and I'm really glad for them. That is empathy. So empathy is your ability to understand and to identify the emotions of others. Number 3, empathy is a building block of emotional intelligence. I talk about emotional intelligence a lot because of the impact that it has on our professional and personal well-being and success. Empathy itself is one of the foundational facets to emotional intelligence. As a matter of fact, it very closely identifies with social awareness. Social awareness is your ability to sense either how other people are doing or feeling or what the social situation is around you. It's akin to when somebody says you're really good at reading the room. Well, reading the room is social awareness, and that's part of emotional intelligence. Now, the next step of that, after you've empathized and you've understood and been socially aware in a given situation, is social management. This is your ability to adjust and to be flexible to match or to work within the emotions of another person or within the room. Follow this, if you will. Social management means going into a situation and recognizing with your social awareness, with your empathy, so-and-so is particularly upset. This individual is really upset about something. I am going to give them their space and make sure that they know I'm here for them. Or I'm going to approach this person and see if there's anything they need and give them the opportunity to open up. Doesn't mean that you're going to pry. It doesn't mean that you're going to try and get too deep into what's going on with them unless they want you to. But it is the ability to make adjustments to yourself based on how another person is feeling or based on a situation. So empathy is part of social awareness. That leads into social management, and those are critical parts of emotional intelligence. And number 4, empathy is incredibly important to effective leadership. To lead is to listen. Leaders who empathize with their team, who understand their situation and are willing to identify, realize, understand, and work with the emotions of their team are going to be more effective leaders. Empathetic leaders have the ability to boost morale. They can better mitigate conflict. They can help with conflict resolution. That doesn't mean conflict avoidance. Conflict can be an important part of being on a team. But how that conflict is resolved a lot of times comes down to the emotional intelligence of the team and can be guided because of the empathy of a strong leader. Empathetic leaders also create environments of greater psychological safety where people feel valued, feel important. This allows them to be more creative, to be more authentic, to be more themselves. And as a result, they may be more innovative and they bring their whole self to work so they perform at a higher level. Which means that empathetic leaders will overall get more out of their team than somebody who doesn't practice empathy. So those are the 4 things empathy is. Let's talk about 4 things empathy is not. Number 1, and if you take nothing else away from this particular video, take the next 4 words to heart. Empathy is not weakness. There is this still existing preconceived notion that somebody who's empathetic is weak. Because we still have these archetypes, although they've declined in the last several decades, but there are still these ideas, this archetype of a great leader being this detached, emotionless, demonstrative, directive individual. That leadership is not modern leadership. Empathetic leadership is. But there still exists this notion in some that somebody who is empathetic and who leads with their feelings is weaker than somebody who puts their emotions aside. Now, that doesn't mean that empathetic people let their emotions control them. It's actually quite the opposite. Somebody who's empathetic, again, is practicing that social awareness and that social management so that way they can better understand others. I would argue it takes more strength to be empathetic, to put your own desires and thoughts aside for a moment to really focus on and identify with a member of your team or a member of your community. It takes tremendous strength to do that. It takes even more strength to practice the social management necessary to adjust according to what you see and what your empathy tells you. Empathy is not weakness. Number 2, empathy is not pity. Empathy does not mean taking pity on somebody when something goes wrong. It's actually, again, quite the opposite. It means identifying with something when they're going through a strong emotion and trying to understand how they feel. It doesn't mean keeping a distance and just saying, I feel so sorry for this person. I'm glad it wasn't me. Right? That schadenfreude that we sometimes get when we're just glad that we're not dealing with a certain situation. That's not empathy. That's the opposite of empathy. Empathy is not pity because you really are investing yourself in another person when you're being empathetic to them. You're not pitying them from a distance. Number 3, empathy is not presumption. Being empathetic, being able to identify and understand the feelings of others, doesn't give you a license to assume that you know every facet and every detail about what they're feeling, why they're feeling that way, or how you should react or respond. If you're empathetic, you're trying to find different ways to gather more information or to adjust based off of what you think that person may need. But you have to also understand there's probably details that you're missing. And there may be details that the other person doesn't even want you to know and that you want to stay clear of. So practice caution. Being empathetic doesn't mean that you know everything that's going on with somebody. It's not clairvoyance. It's just the ability to understand and identify the feelings of others. Number 4. Empathy is not about being exactly the same. We can empathize with other people without having to have had the exact same life experiences. We didn't need to have the same exact experience with the other individual who might be feeling sad, angry, ashamed, elated. But if we're empathetic, we can put ourselves in their shoes and we can understand why they're feeling the way they're feeling. Maybe we can relate it back to a similar experience that we've had. But that certainly doesn't mean that the only people in the world who can be empathetic are people who've had the exact same experiences as others. As a matter of fact, that's incredibly unlikely. Think about how often you're empathizing with somebody and you have the exact same story or the exact same detail that that person has. So being empathetic doesn't mean that there are no differences. As a matter of fact, you might embrace those differences, but you're still appreciating the way the other person feels. So there you go. 4 things empathy is, and 4 things empathy is not. I hope you enjoyed these quick lists. Please share your thoughts in the comments section. And if you haven't already done so, or if you're new to Chris Fitzpatrick Speaks, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so that way you know when new content comes out. By all means, share this with friends, colleagues, or anyone in your circle who might be able to benefit from information on topics like these, whether it's empathy and emotional intelligence, communication skills, leadership, mentoring, personal branding, professionalism, or any of the other topics that I cover here on my YouTube channel. And if you are checking me out on LinkedIn through my newsletter, please make sure you subscribe to that too, and by all means, share that as well. I appreciate you checking in here on Chris Fitzpatrick Speaks. I hope you enjoyed our quick discussion on the power of empathy and the 4 things empathy is and the 4 things empathy isn't. And I hope you go forward empathetic in your everyday lives. Thank you so much for spending some time with me.